Okay, the US M1 Carbine. This weapon has its own interesting little story, and some of it kind of does tie in with the M16 AR15 system. Which was strange about this is another weapon that was developed prior to the war. It was worked on. The innovative thing about it is where the M1 Garand has this long operating rod that travels around. This is the first gun that had the short stroke gas piston, which there's a little piston in there, and very similar. It has a very similar mechanism to the M1 Garand, basically kind of scaled down, but the way it works is a little bit different. Also, what's different, it has a detachable magazine. Let me get that. I can remember. Ah, there it is. Which were 15 rounders like this initially when the war started. Now, the original design had a simple flip safety, peep sight, two-position flip-up safety. This is like the original without a bayonet lug. This is the way they came. Had a little bit simpler sight. The only changes they ever made to this gun is they added a bayonet lug on there later. They changed the sight to a little bit more complicated sight, like this one here. And either the magazine and the safety, this has the, that's what I keep forgetting. You gotta cock it. This has a push button safety on it, where they had a flag safety that when you turned it down there was a little leg here that you could touch and find in the dark, where this push button is the older style. There were no technical difficulties with this gun. The only complaints the soldiers had, no bayonet lug, which they added later on after they reworked them, and the fact the cartridge was not very powerful. Okay, the 30 caliber cartridge was not powerful. It wouldn't, you know, there's a few guys that told me that they put 4 or 5 rounds on the guy and it didn't knock him down. They kind of didn't like that. But then again, you have to look at what the purpose was. The whole purpose of this weapon was to replace this weapon, the 45, 1911 45. Now the concept was, you know, like mortar crews or truck drivers carry a pistol, they give them this. Thinking about it, yeah, it's a little bit better than a pistol. You know, I can shoot this easily out to 100 yards, but the killing power, I don't know. It was lightweight, easy recoil, easy to control and manage, and the soldiers didn't like the fact that couldn't put a bayonet supposedly on it. I don't know if that's true or not. And also, my grandfather and many World War II vets told me what guys used to do with this gun because of the, you know, the fact it's controllable. They would take it apart and file the sear. They would file the sear so it would fire fully automatic. I guess so many of the soldiers did this that the government after World War II redesigned it to the M2 carbine, which they had drop-in kits to make them selective fire guns. They had a switch on there, semi-automatic, full automatic, and they also redesigned a 30-round magazine other than a 15-round. So this gun, in comparison to the AR-15 M16, in its use had some modifications to it. They added things, you know, like the M16 forward assist, changed the barrel, changed the sights, this and that. So that's where it commonly went. It's a reliable gun, like I said, other than the lack of killing power. That was about the only thing about it. The other unusual thing about this gun is when you look at the numbers of small arms produced in total in World War II, that means M1 Garands, 45 automatic pistols, and all this other stuff. This was the one weapon that was manufactured and accepted by the government in the highest numbers, was the M1 Carbine. Okay, they made more of these than any other rifle or pistol in all of World War II. Okay, why is still a mystery, but it was. They made more of these than any other small arm. So now, that leaves the government with a huge excess of these guns. Also, the government looked at this weapon in a different light, which was unusual, where if you were leaving the service, they had a surplus of M1 Garands, and they wanted to turn it into money, sell them off, they didn't need them, they allowed the servicemen to buy their rifle. Okay, that was done. I've heard that when guys were mustering out and that came, they had shotguns, riot guns, that if you wanted to buy it, you could take it home. They were selling the guns that were, non-automatic to people to use. Okay, that's how the government disposed of it. For some strange reason, the government made a ton of these rifles or carbines, and they wouldn't release them out of the service. They wouldn't sell them on the surplus market. They wouldn't let soldiers take them home. And they weren't available for sale until for some reason they restricted it. Why, I don't know. Because this was, if you look at it at the time in 1938, this is pretty innovative. Pretty advanced design type of gun. If it was just in a different caliber, it'd probably be a whole different story. But they didn't start until like the late 50s, 58, 59. Then they started releasing these things and selling them. And I remember my grandfather told me, I remember you can go in a magazine and buy a brand new, never fired M1 carbine for like $40 or something, or $38 or something. I forget what it was. He said, in the grease. And that's where a lot of these got out in the market, got into the civilian world. And then again, for some reason, and I don't know if it's because it isn't considered like a battle rifle or firing at 30-06 or 308. They never really got into these or agitated about them as an assault rifle, okay? And I guess because people think the small cartridge, it's not that type of a weapon. So like I said, this is where you get these odd ways of looking at it. You never see anybody complaining about the M1 carbine. I mean, the M1 Garand, oh, well, that's a combat rifle, it shouldn't be sold to the public. The military didn't sell them to the public for a while, okay? And then all of a sudden they did. So it's funny how they look at one gun one way and one that's probably, this is even more convenient. And another thing, they had a mass shooting with this gun. And what it was is in Texas, the tower shooting or something, this guy was going to college and that, and disgruntled, and something about the medication he was taking. He went into a gun shop, bought an M1 carbine, bought 800 rounds of ammunition, and climbed up a tower. And the guy was a mathematician or engineer or something. That's what he's going to school for. And he calculated from this tower with this little gun he could shoot, and they said he was shooting people at distances they didn't believe that he could. And what it was is the fact that the tower and then coming down extended the range and the force of the cartridge. And unfortunately, that's how that kind of tied it in. And I believe it was the only time an M1 carbine made national news or was used in such a crime. And there were plenty of them to go around because the government had such a surplus of them that what they did, and it was in the American Rifleman somewhere, how they stored them. They had the guns, they had to put them in deep storage. So they had like these cylinders where they would put the guns in a rack and lower them down in there and then fill these metal cylinders with nitrogen so they wouldn't rust. and put them in long-term storage. And in the end, you know, they had to dispose of them. They had a ton of them. What do we do, you know? Yeah, in the 50s, in the early 60s, they sold them outright, but then, you know, the government stopped, because like I said with the M1 Garand, we're not selling these guns to the general public, 45s and that. You used to be able to buy a 45 from the government, okay? They put a stop to that. You could get these guns through the DCM, and I know several fellows, friends of mine that did and have them. But then the government had this other thing, okay, nobody's buying them, we can't sell them, they don't want us to sell them, what do we do with them? So I guess around the same time in the 80s, because they didn't know what to do with the M1 carbines they had also, they ended up giving a ton of them to the Mexican government to be issued to their police forces. So I guess the federales got their fair share of carbines wherever they went, and that's where they ended up going. And that's what happened to those. And then there were some that were brought in the 80s from overseas, from Korea and that. I don't know if the Koreans have any more of them. I think the carbines, they all turned in, you know, that was back during the big boom after 86 when they changed the law. And all of these guns were now curio and relic and not considered a threat. And I remember you used to be able to pick up one of them worked over ones, the stock was refinished and that, and it, you know, you can find a good one. They're about $200 at the time. They're a fun gun to shoot, you know, neat part of military history, but that's kind of the fate that this gun ran into. How it ties in to the AR-15 M16 is, at the time, it was pretty innovative. I mean, the short piston, detachable magazine, it was converted to selective fire. So you can see where the government was looking at this. Lightweight gun, easy to control, detachable magazine, selective fire, easy to, you know, it's easy to control and full automatic. Okay? And kind of this is the roots to where we ended up going towards the next rifles in our series here, where we get into the M14 and then eventually how we got down to the M16. But that's what kind of started it. And also, unfortunately, it was used in a mass shooting, which kind of ties it in to the AR-15 M16 story. That's kind of a tie-in to it also. There wasn't really any political skullduggery over this thing. It was kind of unusual how they developed this whole completely different weapon and adopted it with, you know, no political intrigue or whatever. And these guns were used right up in the Vietnam War, and I don't know how long the U.S. military used them. I knew they were used on guard duty a lot better than having a 45. So that's about my take on this one and how it kind of all ties in the progression to where we're going.